Hello and welcome back to the Frontington and Backwards Railway. I was having a look at my YouTube channel the other day and realised that it's a long time since my last update. In fact, it's not one, not three, but too long. So I thought today I would give you a quick update on what's been going on the layout. Now, if you haven't been tuning into these videos before, and you don't know anything about the Frontington and Backwards Railway, I'm going to just give you a very quick reminder of what's going on here. The Frontington and Backwards Railway is a 00 scale layout. The baseboard is chipboard with extruded polystyrene sheets layered on top to give us a bit of a landscape. The track itself is all second-hand and probably about 30 years old, and it makes exclusive use of these wonderful prototypical first radius curves. At the front of the layout we have Frontington. It's called Frontington because it's at the front. And at the back of the layout we have Backwards. It's called Backwards because it's a pretty name. Now, since there are several things to update you on, I thought I'd split this video up into a few different sections, just to make things a little bit more bite-size. The first half, I'm going to look at some of the scenery that I've been working on. In the second half, I'll look at some of the electrics. And in the third half, because I can't count, we'll look at some of the engines. One of the things I've been working on since the last update video are these fences separating the gardens of these houses. Now, sure, you can buy fences, you can buy fence kits off the internet. I thought I'd do something slightly different. Now, if you're into your computer-aided design, which I'm not, you can make your 3D models look a little bit more realistic by adding textures. Images that you can apply to your models to make them look more realistic. So I grabbed one of these textures, printed it off onto some card, and hey presto, here are some fences. I've taken a 3D model and made it truly 3D. These are in fact three-dimensional 3D models. If you like, these are 9-dimensional fences. Here is a tree I made. Here is another 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 tree I made. Here are the trees I made that didn't work. Here is a little archway that I've made in a garden. It's just a couple of little bits of metal, shaped to fit, and the bit in the middle that's meant to be the plant, or whatever that's meant to be. Actually, that's just a bit of twine, a bit of string that's been frayed out a bit and splodged around a bit with some acrylic paint. I mean, it probably doesn't look great up close, but from a distance, you'd never notice. For the eagle-eyed among you, there's a little detail here that I've added. It's a little bird box attached to the fence. Now, when I first came up with the idea of a bird box, I thought, wow, that's just really too small to model. But I found a way. That is the end of a matchstick. The top is filed at a slight angle and then coloured in with a pencil. And then there's a tiny little hole drilled in the front. But that does the job. Part 2 is all about electrics. I'm not exactly proud of what you can see here. In fact, I'm not going to film this. But I am going to film this. This is a little tiny Arduino Nano. It's attached to all sorts of different lights and LEDs and things all over the layout. And some of those are powered by the relays that you can see on the right there. You see, the wonderful idea I had was to light up all of my layout using the Arduino in a kind of programmed kind of way to give a bit of life to it. Let me show you what I mean. Oh, hang on a second. Need to turn it on. We start off in the dead of night. All that's on are the streetlights. But as dawn rises, the layout comes to life. Albeit very slowly. Somewhere around here. Oh yes, there's a light. There's a light. Okay, it's probably not a huge amount you can see here. Basically what's happening here is the Arduino is gradually turning things on. There's a bit of randomness built in to everything here, so that gradually, as we represent daytime, or morning in this case, more and more things start to turn on. It's not on a timer, it's all sort of random-ish. Again, platform lights are on, car park lights are on, platform lights are on. I think I might have said that already, but they're important. Now, if you know your Arduinos, you'll know that there's a limit on how many LEDs you can power at once. Has a maximum number of things it can do. To get around this, I've wired up the LEDs in a what's called Charlie-plexing, which is just a complicated way of saying it turns on every LED in turn very, very quickly. So fast, in fact, that the human eye can't detect that it's even turned off. In some ways, actually, it's like a pulse wave modulation thing that your controller might have, PWM. The result of that, unfortunately, is that all the LEDs now look really dim. Now, hang on a moment, I hear you cry. Couldn't you have just done that with a switch, I hear you cry? Is that really a good use of an Arduino, I hear you cry? Well, if you let me get a word in edgeways, yes, I could have done all of this with a switch. I really did not need to program an Arduino just to achieve all this lighting. In fact, now that I've done it, and I've gone to the length of doing all of this programming and setup and wiring and all that shenanigans that happens with an Arduino, I found that actually I very rarely use the lights. Because, to be honest, I prefer to be able to see my trains. That's better. So, what am I going to do with that Arduino? That is a very good question. I'm glad you asked. I have an idea. You see, this railway is meant to be a heritage railway. It's set sort of modern day-ish, which is basically a modeller's way of saying, I'm going to do what I want. Now, those level crossing gates look really, really nice and would be very fitting for a period layout. But if this isn't a period layout, I'd have thought that the Ministry of Transport or Ministry of Level Crossings or whoever they are probably would have updated those by now. So, a potential idea is to use my Arduino to control some barriers using some servos and some flashy lights. Can I achieve this? Time will tell. I've also installed some speakers. Not for the banging tunes, but for some sound effects. They were originally part of this Bluetooth speaker, which I've taken apart and rewired. So now I can connect my phone to my layout and play some sound effects. Part the third. Engines. Engines are, of course, the mainstay of any good layout. And like a good modeler, I've been building up my collection. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll probably have seen these two engines that I had. The one on the left is a J94, and the one on the right is a Terrier. And these two work really, really well. They're lovely little 060 tank engines that cope with my tight radius curves really, really well. However, this is meant to be a branch line on the Great Western Railway, so I really ought to have some green engines. This is a 45XX Small Prairie. I think this is a Bachmann model. It's a 262 tank engine, and it's gorgeous. Really looks a treat on this layout. But is there room for more? Yes. This is a 1366. It's made by Helgen, and it's so cute! It's another 060 tank engine, and it looks really, really at home on my Great Western layout. Technically, I do also have its bigger brother, a 57XX. But unfortunately, this is a really old model. I think it's a replica railways model, probably from the 1400s or something. It's got a split chassis, doesn't run particularly reliably, and insists on derailing itself on the curves. So, yeah, I think that's going into retirement. So that's it. That is the Frontington and Backwards fleet. Oh, and that one. Yes, that is Smokey Joe. Of course, it's not just any Smokey Joe. This was actually one of my very first models way back in the day. And like everyone else's, it had two speeds, stop and shoot off the track. But I did have a soft spot for it, and I thought it really does need to be a first-class citizen on this railway. So it's had a few upgrades. The comical writing on the side of the tank is now painted over. I've installed some railings along the side. Now, I know what you're thinking, they look a little bit crooked. Well, that's probably prototypical, and not at all because I chose too thin a wire. There's also some weathering here and there. The cab has been painted. There's even a little man in there. But the biggest thing you'll notice is that it now has a tender. You see, being an 040 engine, it's only got 4 points of contact with the rails, which, as we all know, leads to very poor electrical conductivity. So I gave it 4 more. In there are some pickups, and there are wires leading into the engine to connect it to the motor, which really, really improves the reliability and slow running of this engine. But that's not the end of the story. There are still a few details I need to add to Smokey Joe. That tender still needs a few more details added to it. But I think I'm at my limit now of how many engines I can sensibly fit onto my layout. I do not need any more engines.